So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make a trifold pad. Now, this pad was suggested for me to make a tutorial on by someone. They had some specific things that they wanted included in this pad tutorial, so that's of course going to be tailored to their taste, but I am going to try my best to cover as many bases as I can and make sure that this tutorial will cover a multitude of needs. While I am ironing my fabric, which I suggest everyone always does before you begin sewing for a better final project, I am going to explain a little bit about what a trifold pad is. A trifold pad is kind of what it sounds like. It's a pad that's folded in thirds. It's then attached to the underwear. Sometimes people just lay them inside of their underwear. We are going to be adding a snap closure on ours. That way it will actually attach to the underwear and not fall out. So that's completely up to you, whether you just want to fold it in thirds and then have it sit on your underwear or whether you want it attached. A trifold pad is usually preferable for people who are on a lower budget and can't make as many pads, for people who don't want very much waste in their pads. It's also really good for people that don't have access to things like a washing machine or a dryer. So these pads will dry faster, they'll wash easier. They have as many or more layers as a typical all-in-one pad, but because of their construction, it makes them a little bit easier to launder and dry. These pads are also preferable for people who like a pad that's a little bit more adjustable. So people that like to be able to add absorbency into their pads, as you can just fold in an additional absorbent layer into the pad when you're adding it into your underwear. So that's an option if you like to be able to add some absorbency to your pad. The pad we are going to be making today is going to be a trifold pad that has a snap closure to it and that also has a PUL layer in it. I'm going to be showing you how to construct them with a couple of different sewing methods. So if you want a bit of a quicker project, I'll show you how to do that. But the actual pad that we're going to be sewing today is going to be the construction that I prefer and that I would actually use in my day-to-day life, but we are going to be covering how to make it a little bit quicker and faster. I am also going to be showing you how to make your own very basic pattern, but if you would like, I am going to try and find some patterns and link them in the description box down below. If you would prefer to purchase a pad pattern and you don't want to make your own, so I will have those in the description box down below. This could very easily be made with a pattern that you already have and like. It would be a little bit more difficult, especially if that pad is a little bit curvier, but you can just implement the steps that I'm going to show you and do that with a pad that you like. So if we start down here, this floral blue cotton is going to be what is going to be visible on the top of the pad when it's folded and in your underwear. This light blue flannel is going to be our absorbent layer for our pad. This white fabric is PUL. It has a kind of knit side on one side and it's shiny on the other. And then this cream colored flannel is going to be what is going to be opposite of this blue floral fabric. So the two fabrics you're going to be seeing on either side of the pad are going to be this cream colored flannel and this blue floral cotton. To make this pad, we are going to need two separate pattern pieces. We're going to need the pattern for the pad itself. We're going to need a pattern for the wings. So the first thing that we're going to construct is going to be the pattern for the pad itself. So all I have here is two pieces of just plain white printer paper. I tend to need a little bit of a longer pad, so I am going to put them together with the long sides together so that they are a little bit longer for me. The first measurement you're going to need is the final width of the pad that you're going to want. So typically a pad is going to be anywhere from 2 to 3 inches. I like mine about 2.5 to 3, with 2 3/4 being kind of my ideal width. I am going to measure from the edge up to 2 3/4. And then I'm going to add another 1/4 inch for a little bit of wiggle room when the pad is folded over. Here I've marked off 3 inches. I'm going to fold my paper on that 3-inch line. And then fold my paper again on that 3-inch line so that I have one piece of paper that's folded into thirds evenly. And now I'm going to trim off the excess. So the next measurement that we need is going to be the length of our pad. So this is going to be the pad as it's sitting in your underwear. We have to figure out how long we want that pad to be. I tend to like a pad that's about 10 to 14 inches, so I'm going to be making a 12-inch pad today. And then I'm going to add about a 1/2 inch for seam allowance. This is our finished pad pattern. The pad itself is 12 1/4 inches long. It's folded 3 times at about 3 inches each. That is going to be our pad pattern for the pad itself. The next pattern that we have to make is going to be for the wings. The typical wingspan of a pad is about 7 inches, so 7 inches from tip of wing to tip of wing. I am going to mark off 7 inches. If you know you like your wings a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, this is the part where you can get to customize your personal pad, which is nice. Sometimes you don't have that freedom with an already made pad, but you do have that freedom when you're making the pad yourself. So this is going to be the part of the pad that wraps around your underwear, kind of like so. These parts on the end are going to overlap, and this is where your snap or your Velcro or whatever closure you want on your pad is going to be. The next thing you have to decide is how wide you want your wings to be. This is completely up to you. The wider your wing is, the less it's going to move in your underwear. However, some people find that can make the pad a little bit bulky and a little bit hard to move around in, or it can cause the pad to fold up a little bit. So what I am going to do is I'm going to make mine about 2 inches wide. I don't want it to be too exceptionally wide, but I don't want it to be too short either. If it's short, it could move around in your underwear a lot and cause your pad to shift. So I kind of like mine to be around 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches if you find that 2 inches is a little bit too big, especially if you prefer a little bit of a smaller pad or you wear a little bit smaller underwear. You might find that going a little bit narrower is better for you. And now that we have our constructed pattern pieces, we can start cutting them out. The beauty of this pad is that you can kind of just lay your pattern pieces out the way that you want them constructed and sew them together. You don't have to worry about a separate core, any other separate pieces kind of running around. In this case, we are going to be having a separate piece in the form of a PUL piece, so we're going to keep that in mind. But right now I'm just putting together my pad how I want it to be. I want my good sides facing together. This is flannel, so it doesn't really have a good side, but I want my pretty flowers facing up. I'm going to put my flannel on top of that and smooth it out. We don't want any bubbles when we're cutting or any fabric moving. I'm going to put my core piece on top of that. So here I have laid out my fabric. I have the print facing up towards the other fabrics with the wrong side facing the table. My part that's going to be facing the floral pattern is facing down. This, in my case, is a flannel, so it doesn't have a print side, but if it did have a print side or a pretty side, you would have the pretty sides facing together. And then I have my core fabric laid down on top of both of those. And again, it's a core fabric, so there really is no pretty or right side. A note that I want to make is that in a typical construction of a pad, you would have a topper, such as this floral fabric. You would have a backer that you would face right sides together with the floral fabric, and then you would have your core on the inside. With this, you're going to kind of want all of your layers to be absorbent. You're not going to want the part facing your pretty floral topper to be a water resistant layer. If I just move my fabric so that you can visualize, this is going to be kind of how the pad looks when it's sitting in your underwear. So this floral fabric is going to be facing the other way around. It's going to be looking down, and this part is going to be looking up at you. In my case, it's this cream colored flannel. So you're going to have this cream colored flannel looking up at you, your core fabric, your pretty floral fabric, and then your wings on the bottom. And that's how the pad is going to be sitting in your underwear. If you have a water resistant layer as my cream colored fabric layer here, then you're going to be losing out on some of your absorbency. You're only going to be using the top layer of your pad. So the way the pad is folded, it's going to be folded in on itself and then in on itself, and the wings are going to be on the back here. So you're going to be seeing this pretty floral pad on the upside. You're not going to see your core, and then this backer fabric is going to be underneath that. And if you have this backer fabric facing down, then you're only going to be using this part of the fabric, this third of the pad. And that could be how you would like your pad to be, so that you could just fold this one underneath the other side and you would have a clean, fresh layer. But then you would also have another third of the pad at the very bottom of your underwear where you couldn't use any absorbency. My personal suggestion is to have all of the layers a absorbent kind of layer so that you can use the entire pad instead of having parts of the pad that you wouldn't be able to use if you had a waterproof part of that pad preventing the flow from going down into another part of the pad. So I have got my fabric all laid down. I have it in the order that I'm going to be sewing it in. I'm smoothing it out to make sure that there's no pieces folded in on itself. If you have fresh new fabric, then this is a really good pattern for you because of course it's just a big rectangle. You're not gonna have any scraps, you're not gonna have any strange pieces. You can just cut a great big old rectangle out of your entire fabric, get your stash done, and then you won't have to worry about it anymore. But I have used these fabrics for other pads, so they have little strange parts and tails on them. They're not quite as pretty and even. So I'm going to lay my pattern down as close to the edge as I can get it. I have a little bit of selvage over here and down here, so I'm trying to avoid that. And I am just going to cut all the way around my little rectangle pad pattern. All right, so now I have all of my fabric cut out. I did leave a little bit of space around the entire thing just in case I do not stitch evenly or what have you. If you wanted to have an actual line to sew on, then you could have traced this and cut it out before. But because this is a rectangle, I don't think I'm gonna have too much trouble following the edges. I'll trim up a couple of these that are a little more uneven. So the pad that I am going to be showing you how to sew today is going to be in the turn and top stitch style. If you did not want to turn and top stitch your pad, then you would just put your pad together how you want it facing outward. Something like this with your topper, your core, and your backer, and then you can just go all the way around the edge doing a blanket stitch. I have a video for how to do a blanket stitch or a faux serge pad. I will have that link down below in the description box so you can follow that if you would like that tutorial. But we're going to be doing a turned and top stitch pad today. I just find that they are a little bit more sturdy. They hold up a little bit better than the faux serged ones, and I'm not in the habit of making pads that are in a disposable nature. But if you need to make them like that, if you have a little bit of dexterity issues or time restraints or what have you, and you need to make your pads in that fashion, that is perfectly fine. We do not judge here. All right, so all of my pad is laid down together, and you're asking yourself, okay, but you said that we're gonna have a PUL layer in this. Where does that go? It's going to go in the middle here. You can make another pattern piece for this, but I'll show you an easy way to get a PUL cut out of your pad pattern that you've already made and not have so many patterns lying around. So all you're going to do is lay the folded up pattern piece for your main piece. You're just going to lay that down on your PUL. Lay it a little bit, about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of your fabric, and cut around with that 1/4 inch allowance. You can also do this if you don't have PUL, that's okay. You can also do this with a flannel piece. It's all the same, but whatever your water resistant layer is going to be, you're just going to take your pad pattern, fold it into thirds, lay it about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of your fabric, and then cut 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of your pattern to make your PUL piece. Now, if you're wondering why we cut 1/4 of an inch away and did not cut on the line, that's because I like to cut my PUL a little bit bigger than my other pattern pieces. I find that when you're sewing and pinning, PUL can shift around a little bit more because of the slippery nature of PUL. So I like to cut my PUL pieces just a little bit bigger than what is necessary. Also, having that little 1/4 inch all the way around is going to give us something to sew on. That way you will have fabric around the edge and you won't be putting too much stress on your PUL as if you had sewn right up on the edge of it. Now we are going to lay our PUL in the middle of our pad. You can eyeball this or you can measure it, that's completely up to you. I am going to eyeball it. Now, I am not a PUL purist. I don't think that PUL necessarily has a right or a wrong side. It certainly does if the PUL is going to be facing your underwear. You want the fabric part to be facing your underwear rather than the slippery part for obvious reasons. You don't want your pad slip sliding in your underwear. But when the PUL is inside of a pad, just like if your fleece were inside of your pad, I don't think that it has a wrong side simply because it's going to be doing its job either way. The whole thing is waterproof. Now I'm going to pin it all together. I am not a PUL purist. I do not think that poking holes in the seam allowance of your PUL is going to inhibit its function at all, but if you do not want to pin your PUL, that's perfectly fine. I would suggest maybe some sewing clips. I like using sewing clips a lot with PUL, especially if I have a little bit of a bulkier project that I'm working with, like an overnight pad. At least my personal opinion is if you are pinning in the seam allowance of the PUL, then you're not putting any necessary holes in it. I pinned the PUL twice on either end. I did not pin in the middle here just yet. I'll show you why when we get to that part. But I've pinned all the way around. The next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making a straight stitch all the way around the perimeter of the pad, and I will show you how to do that. So here I have a sewing needle. It's just your basic generic sewing needle, nothing fancy. If you would like to know though, I do prefer the Singer brand hand sewing needles, but this is not one of those. I can't find my Singer sewing needles. And then I just have some thread. You could use a matching thread, but I'm not too concerned about it for the inside, and also I want you to be able to see it. So I'm using brown against this blue in hopes that you'll be able to see it a little bit better. I'm going to cut a length of string about as long as my arm, and then I am going to thread the needle. It's easier when you're not doing it on camera. So I'm going to bring my ends up, make them about as even as I can, and then I'm going to make about 3 knots in it. 3 knots might be a little bit unnecessary, 2 might suffice perfectly fine, but I'm a worrywart. In fact, I might even do 4 while we're talking about it. You are going to start on one of the longer ends of your fabric because that's where we're going to be putting our turning hole. So the first thing you're going to do is be appalled at the amount of lint and cat hair on my fabric, and then you're going to take your needle and go into the fabric from the back to the front or the bottom to the top, and you're going to bring your needle all the way up. If you notice that you have a little loop like this, go ahead and give your needle a little bit of a tug and run your fingers all the way down it to make sure that your thread is as even as possible. That'll help with breaking. You're going to go about the length of a grain of rice away from your first stitch, go into the fabric from the top to the back, just like this, and then pull your fabric through, your thread through rather. So I'm going to sew a few more stitches just to show you in sped up time how that looks. There you go, that is a back stitch. I was doing it, of course, in the camera, so it was a little bit more difficult for me to see. But the smaller and closer together you make your stitches, the neater you make your stitches, the better your project will be, and the better it will hold up. I always try to take my time and make sure that it is as neat and nice as possible. I'm not worried about perfection or machine quality or what have you. I just want my pad to hold up. I will be sewing all the way around the pad, leaving about 1.5 inches, 2 inch space from my starting point to my stopping point. That way I can turn my pad inside out, and I will come back when we get to that stage. So I have gone all the way around with a straight stitch. I've left about 1.5 inch hole here at one of the longer sides to be able to turn it out. I am not going to trim any of the edges. I think that I got close enough. I probably could have used a line to sew on, but it's not horrendous or anything, so I'm gonna go ahead as is. What I am going to do is I'm going to trim my corners because that is going to make a little bit of a better finished product for us. In order to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to snip across at the corner there and take off a little triangle, being very careful not to snip through my stitches on either side. We just want to take off the bulk of the seam allowance here. If you'd like, you can also go in and trim just a little bit on either side of the triangle that you made if you perhaps added a couple of extra layers of flannel for a little bit extra absorbency and you're worried about your corners not poking out quite as nice. But I'm just going to go ahead and do that for all 4 of my corners. I'm going to go in through the flower and the cream colored flannel layer. Of course, this blue is our core, so we're going to go in between the 2 outer layers. I'm gonna put my finger in there, go to one of the farthest corners and just poke it out and pull the pad out through this hole. Be very, very careful not to yank or be too aggressive with it. You don't want to pop any seams and then you have to go back and fix that. I'm just moving the pad, shifting it here and there, working with my fingers to work the rest of the pad out, pushing it in through the hole, and then I'm going to go in and just pop out the corners with my finger, and then I'm going to put my scissors in through the hole. Use blunt scissors. Don't use like your snipping shears or anything like that. Nothing that has a really sharp edge to it. You can also use a chopstick. I have a chopstick specifically for this, but heaven only knows where it's at. And you're just going to go in and poke out all of your corners. Again, be very, very careful when you're poking. You don't want to poke through your fabric, then you'll have a hole and you'll have to go back and repair that, and nobody wants to do that. Okay, now I do not normally iron my pads when I go to do them. I usually just finger roll them as I go along and make sure that everything is flat, but since this is more or less a big old rectangle and I don't have to worry about any strange corners or anything not being poked out, I am going to go and press this. Now, it does have PUL in it, so you do not want to iron on the side that has PUL. In fact, if you're a little uncomfortable, you can lay down another piece of flannel on top of this before you iron it, but you can also peek in your hole and see where your PUL is. And the PUL in this one is right up against this blue floral side. So I'm going to iron it from this cream side because then I have 2 layers of flannel before I get to the PUL. I'm also going to iron with steam on about a medium heat, and I'm not going to hold my iron down in any one spot. I'm going to keep my iron moving as I'm ironing it so that I'm not melting my PUL in any way. I just went and pressed it really quick. I really just focused on flattening out these edges and then just did a quick once over on the flat middle side of it. But I really just wanted to make sure that these seams were flat, and that way the pad is more or less symmetrical. The next thing we are going to do is we are going to top stitch it, which means we are going to go all the way around the pad as close to the edge as you like. Some people like to do it a little farther away, about 1/4 of an inch. Some people prefer about 1/8 of an inch. I like my top stitching to be about as close to the edge as I can get it. So that's what I'm going to do, but you can do whatever is best for you. Since this pad is a little bit more bulky than a normal pad would be, you can also go around the edge and do a blanket stitch, and that'll help flatten the edge out a little bit. So that is an option for you, and again, that video is going to be linked in the description box down below. So if you need that, it'll be there for you. So I have gone all the way around the pad. I actually did a blanket stitch with this. So as you can see, I went all the way around with a blanket stitch. I just thought that the blanket stitch would be a little bit prettier and maybe reduce a little bit of the bulk, so I did that on mine. You can do a straight stitch if that's easier for you. Now we have the topper and the backer, so to speak. They have the right sides facing out, and this is now our completed pad. The next thing that we are going to be working on is going to be the wings. So I took the wing pattern that we had made, I traced it out onto one side of the fabric. It doesn't really matter which one. I just chose the plain fabric just because it would be a little bit easier to see the line. I have the right sides facing together, and I'm going to do the exact same process for the wings as we did for the pad. I'm going to do a straight stitch all the way around the perimeter, leaving about 1 inch to 1.5 inches open on one side. I'm going to flip it out and then top stitch all the way around the outside perimeter of the wings, and then we will come back and I will show you how we're going to attach the wings to the pad. So here I have the finished pad and the finished wings. I did the same sort of blanket stitch on the wings as I did on the pad, so they very closely resemble one another. The last step is to add the wings to the pad. optional stuff in that you can add some stitching along the folds of the pad to help it fold in on itself a little bit better. I would actually not even consider that to be optional, especially if your pad has a few more layers and it's a little bit more bulky. The stitching to help with the folds might be mandatory depending on how you feel your final product comes out. In the process of adding the wings to the pad, I will show you how to add that stitching, but just bear in mind that the stitching is optional. You don't have to do it. So to attach our wings to our pad, we are going to need some pins. The first thing that you have to determine when adding your wings to your pad is how and where do you want your pad to sit in your underwear. That's going to kind of determine where your wings go. So if you prefer your pad to sit a little more center in your underwear, you'll of course put your wings a little more center in the pad. If you need your pad to sit a little more forward in your underwear, you would put your wings further back. Again, if you would like it to sit a little more back in your underwear, you would put it a little more forward. This is completely up to you. It really depends on how you prefer your pad to sit. For this demonstration, I'm going to put the pads about in the center. If you want it really, really in the center, then you can fold your pad in half, fold your wings in half, and put the two together, and then that will give you the exact center of your pad. These particular wings fit exactly inside of the pad, so I don't really have to guess about whether or not they are even going side to side. If you do have that issue where your wings might be a little longer or shorter, I would again recommend folding your wings in half, folding your pad in half, and then lining up the wings with the pad and making sure that everything is even. My only real concern is that the wings are level. I don't want the wings sitting a little crooked so that the pad is sitting even in my underwear, so I'm going to pay a little bit more attention and make sure that it's even like so. I am going to be demonstrating with the tan side up so you can differentiate between the flowers, because that's a little difficult to tell. But if you want, you can sew it the other way around. When it's snapped into your underwear, it will be with the flowered side out. I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to pin one on either far side of the wing. This is just to keep the wings in place so that I can, I don't have to worry about them moving around or getting twisted or anything. Having it pinned on either side is just going to ensure a nicer finished product. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my pad over. I know that I prefer for the right side to fold in before the left. So I'm going to take, in my instance, the right side and fold it about into the center. In this case, you can kind of feel the PUL in your pad and you can tell sort of where center is. If you can't feel that, that's okay. We're just really eyeballing. Kind of press that down and make sure that it's sitting. And then I'm going to fold the left side over the right. Now here you might come to where you see that your pad is not quite lining up all the way. You might want to fold a little less in on the right and a little more in on the left so that it all fits together. It's all kind of even in your underwear. You don't have like where the ends aren't meeting up, something kind of like that where you have a little bit of a gap. Go ahead and play with it. Make sure that everything is laying the way you want it. Everything is kind of even and how you want it. And when you're happy with that, then we're going to add the 2 pins for our wings. So with the pad folded, I'm just going to put in 1 pin. I'm just gonna kind of poke it in there and then open the pad up, and I'm going to put it in there a little bit better. I don't want to unnecessarily put any holes, especially because we're poking in the PUL. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. I'm just going to poke it where I want it and then unfold the pad and kind of even up that pin. As you can see now, I have the 4 pins in my pad. I have this pink pin is on one end, This blue pin is on the other end. These two are just to keep everything from moving around. At this point, if they're gonna bother you, you can go ahead and take them out. And then in this instance, the black and the green pin are the pins that are going to attach the wings. These are also gonna kind of be the place markers for us to know where we're going to be putting our lines. That way the pad folds a little bit better. If you're just wanting to add the wings to the pad and you don't want that stitching, then you would just place a straight stitch along where your pin is. It can be a simple running stitch or it can be a back stitch. A back stitch is going to be a little bit more sturdy, but a running stitch would be perfectly fine. And then your wings will be attached and you can remove your pins and launder your pad and then go ahead and wear it. If you're wanting to add the line to your pad, the seam to help you fold the pad a little bit better, I have a marker. I don't think this color is going to show up on the blue side, so I'm going to mark on the cream side. And then because we're in my kitchen, I'm just going to be using this cookbook as a straight edge. I'm going to line it up. I can see here where the pins are. So I'm just going to line it up with the pins, make sure that it looks somewhat even. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you take a little bit of time and you line it up and you make it as even as you can, it'll make a little bit of a neater final project. And then I'm just going to mark the line that I'm going to be sewing on. I'm going to mark the other line now. I'm just going to use the edge of this cookbook. I chose this cookbook because it's a little bit thicker than a ruler might be, and it's a little bit heavier, so it'll hold in place so I don't have to worry about it moving around on me and losing my spot. Now we have our two lines that we are going to be tracing along. Now to do a running stitch, I'm going to start on one of my lines. I'm going to put my needle kind of close to the top of the line and pull it through from the back to the front. Then I'm just going to go in about the length of a grain of rice away and pull it through from the front to the back, if you can see that stitch there. Then again, I'm going to put my needle about the length of a grain of rice away from the first one, from the back to the front. Going to draw my thread up, and once more, the length of a grain of rice away, I'm going to put my needle back down through the fabric and draw my thread through. And that is a running stitch. So you have spaces in between your stitches. They're not meeting up. It doesn't necessarily matter if they're too even, but the neater and the more careful you are with your stitches, the better made that your project is going to be. I'm going to go ahead and do a running stitch all the way down both sides, and then I will come back and show you what that looks like when it is finished. So here is our finished pad. I'm going to bring it kind of close. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see the stitching very well. I should have picked a better color marker. But that is the running stitch that I did for attaching the wings and for folding the pad. I did also add my snaps. I put them in wrong for some reason. This is the first pad I've made in a while, so I obviously forgot how I prefer my snaps. Here is the finished pad. It would fit in your underwear somewhat like this. So you would lay it in your underwear and snap the pad around the middle of the underwear, which means that it would be laying in your underwear facing up, just like you see here. You would fold one side of the pad in, and then the other side of the pad in, and it would sit in your underwear just like this. Now, it's sitting on the table, it's wanting to kind of like flop open, but of course when you pull your underwear up, it's going to be pressed up against your body and your body is going to hold it flat like this. This is what the pad is going to look like when it is snapped up and in your underwear. It looks kind of aesthetically pleasing, if I say so myself. I really like how it looks. Some pros and cons. This pad is of course not going to be as thin and trim as other pads are. This is the bottom of this pad. This is where it is folded up. As you can see, it's not the thinnest pad. It's not going to be maybe as discreet as another pad might be. So I grabbed a few pads here just to give you a little bit of a comparison. So the trifold pad is on the top. Beneath that is a fig leaves pad. This next pad is a Cuddle Blossom cloth. This next pad is one that I have made myself. This is another pad that I made myself, but I intentionally made this one as thin as I could possibly get it. So the end of this pad is literally just a cotton layer and this PUL. So this is about as thin as I could get a pad. Hopefully those pads give you a little bit of a reference as to how thick this pad could be. I was not pressing down on them and trying to compact them in any way. I was merely holding them against one another. And as you can see, when this pad is folded up, it is a little bit thicker and it might not be as discreet depending on what kind of underwear you are using. But one absolute pro and one reason why this is a preferred pad for a lot of people is that this pad is a lot easier and quicker to wash and stain treat than another pad might be. Another pro to these pads is that they are very, very quick and easy to construct. You don't have as many turns to go over and making sure that everything is lined up. You don't have all of the extra stitching attaching the core to the topper. It's just this one piece that you're sewing. So it's a lot quicker and easier to sew up these. Trifold pads are also a little bit easier on your wallet because you don't have as much fabric waste as you would when you're sewing an all-in-one pad. You don't have these spaces where the wing meets the side of the pad that you can't use of your fabric. You don't have that many scraps left over if you have a little bit of a strange shape where it might not fit into another pad. You won't have an issue of you can only fit 2 pads on this one section and you have a lot of waste going on. So the trifold pads are better in that respect. You don't have this huge amount of fabric waste. You don't have a lot left over that you have to do something with, and therefore you're not wasting money by having to repurpose or throw away those pieces of fabric that you couldn't use to make your pad stash. Just like any pad, I always suggest that you only make 1 or 2 just to make sure that it is a pattern or a style that you like. You don't want to go and make 30 of these in the hopes and the expectation that this is going to be the pad that's going to work for you. Of course, you can always make a pad work for you, and these pads are quite versatile. I always suggest only making 1 or 2 pads out of the style or the pattern that you're thinking, and then you can go forward once you've tried them and you know that you like them. Another pro of the trifold pad is that you can add absorbency inside of your pad. So if you have a washcloth, a scrap of fabric, or you have made boosters or inserts that you can add into these, then you can always place that down in the center and then fold your pad up. You could even add another layer of absorbency before you fold the second half of the pad in, and you are able to add extra absorbency into your pad if you need that. It's also easy to customize where you might need extra absorbency. So if you only need a little more absorbency in the front, you can just add a little more absorbency in the front. You can fold that in, and then when you're washing it, that's less layers that you have to worry about, and those layers are coming clean easier than if it had been an all-in-one pad. I hope that this was thorough and educational enough. I tried to include as much as I could think of in this video. If there's anything that I missed out or any questions that you have, I'm more than happy to make a follow-up video. Just go ahead and leave that down in the comments below, and I will be sure to get back to you about any questions you might have or anything that you might be a little bit iffy about. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. If you would like, I would love if you would hit the subscribe button down below. It means the absolute world to me. While you're down there, go ahead and hit the like button. That helps YouTube to suggest this video to someone who might need it. And you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?